Hey everybody, it's B007 here for another 10-minute, not movie, but TV review. And today I'm talking about Heeramandi, which is a new Indian TV show on Netflix, which has apparently done incredibly well worldwide, released last Friday, and is trending number one in many territories. It is a show written, directed, musically scored by Sanjay Leela Bhansali, who is an Indian movie director of feature films such as Devdas. And he is known for creating these beautiful, visually stunning costume dramas set in colonial ruled India and before, actually, and before the British rule, and for creating really female centered dramas, I would say, with lavish costumes, beautiful classical Indian music, and these incredibly ambitious sets. So, if I have a criticism of his films, it's that I sometimes find them rather claustrophobic because they are entirely enclosed in these fully built out sets, often at night with stunning lighting design. But he really is someone who is an Indian auteur who's creating his own worlds. Now, this is the first time he's made a TV show, but he's not a stranger to Netflix. So in 2022, his feature film Gangubai Kathiawadi came on Netflix, and it was a feature-length film starring Alia Bhatt and featured a prostitute in 1950s India who went on to become incredibly powerful and actually an activist and a political figure in a civil rights movement. And I thought it was a really stunning film and actually showed Alia Bhatt at her best. And this is I guess it's a topic that he is familiar with. If you think of Devdas, that also features an Indian, well, I mean, how do you describe them? Courtesan, I would say. So for those of you who are from the West and who are approaching Heeramandi, I think you should see it in the context of watching a film about geisha in Japanese culture, that you have these women who are trained in the classical arts. They can recite poetry, they can sing classical music, they can dance mudra, this very specific form of dance that is all designed to seduce, to entice very rich royal aristocratic patrons. And this would have been happening, well, all the way through Indian culture, but certainly reaching its apotheosis in the 1800s and 1900s, often said to be set in and around Lucknow. But this series is set in Lahore, which the aware of you will know is in modern day Pakistan. But of course, this series is set in the 1920s to 1930s in India when we are pre partition and very much under British rule. So Lahore at that time would just have been an Indian city. And it is worthwhile saying that this culture really does stem from the era of Mughal rule in India, which predates obviously the British Raj. And so typically the language is Urdu, that's what the poetry is recited in, and it's part of that Muslim culture. So the characters in this film would be Muslim. And to a certain extent, I think this is kind of remarkable that in modern day Narendra Modi India, which seeks to rewrite Indian history as being Hindu dominated, if not exclusively Hindu, that we have a series that foregrounds and celebrates a form of Indian culture that comes from outside of that Hindu majority. So, for that reason alone, Heeramandi is worth celebrating. Heeramandi means diamond bazaar, and it is a part of Lahore that exists today, but it was known then, it means literally the diamond bazaar, but it was basically the red light district. But again, you have to think of yourself as not a typical red light district, but basically a series of houses run by powerful madams who are training these girls in the classical arts and then trying to secure patrons. So you're not selling a woman by the night, you're securing a long term patron. And these patrons were often the Nawabs, so the historic aristocratic rulers of princely states in India who the British had co opted. And what I think is really fascinating in this TV show is it is political, and you have three different groups. You have the British rulers, you have the aristocratic Nawabs who are in cahoots with them because the British sort of guarantee their aristocratic way of life. And then the third group are the freedom fighters who may or may not include at any one time the women of Heeramandi. So, this is a very female centered drama in a political context. And the star of the show is Manisha Koirala, who is an actress that I haven't seen on screen for decades. She starred famously in 1942, A Love Story, and she plays Mallikajaan, who is the madam of the most famous Korta in Heeramandi, the most famous brothel, and it's called Shahi Mahal. And she's seen as being an incredibly successful businesswoman, incredibly powerful, but ruthless. And she's ruthless with her own family because a lot of her daughters and indeed sisters' relations are also working and being farmed out in this brothel, effectively. Her antagonist is Farida Jan, who was sold by Malika Jan at 9. We realize that she's actually Malika Jan's niece, the daughter of Rehana Appa, Malika's sister, who may or may not have been murdered by Malika Jan. And that's the sort of original sin that sets the story in motion. And Farida Jan is played by Sonakshi Sinha, who you will perhaps remember from The Bung, who is really beautiful and is styled in a slightly different way. So I think if Malika Jan represents the traditional style of these women, then Farida Jan is representing a 1920s evolution. So the way her hair is done, the way she dresses, the way she entertains, throwing cocktail parties rather than dancing mujra, is showing the evolution of these courtesans. And she has a beautiful courta that's sort of decorated in a very Art Deco way, as is the hotel where a lot of the action takes place. It's really beautiful. And in a sense, she, portrays the tension between this ancient courtly art, the modern evolution in the 1920s, and the fact that just as the Nawabs are threatened by independence, so too will the women be. They don't realize it yet because they're fighting for freedom. But actually, when the patrons go, when the aristocrats go, unfortunately, what we know from history is a lot of these women did end up as common prostitutes because that patronage structure was taken away. So we're really at the end of, this particular moment of history. So Farida Jan and Malika Jan are battling each other for control of the market and of the land, and they use the British, they use the Nawabs. They're very much in control. And in the next generation, there are a number of women who have more or less beautiful stories and tragic stories to be told. We have Lajo, who falls in love with the Nawab, but he betrays her and does not marry her and take her out of being a courtesan. It's a very beautiful story. She's played by Richa Chadda, and it's heartbreaking and really speaks to, I think, a lot of the classic Indian films, such as Mughal-e-Azam, such as, well, Devdas, Pakiza, Umrao Jan. That story of the courtesan who falls in love and is betrayed is it's a trope, and it's beautifully, beautifully done here with one of the most beautiful song and dance scenes in the show. We also have a daughter called Bibo Jan, played by Aditi Roy Herdari, who you may have seen in Padmavat. Really beautiful woman and a very good dancer. And effectively, that she's a fascinating character because she is the most popular of the courtesans as the show opens. But she is the one who's going to become most politically active. So it's through her that we're going to see the freedom story told. And in the end, you're going to see the director, Sanjay Leela Bhansali. If you know the very iconic, famous black and white film Mother India, he's going to explicitly use the iconography of the actress in that to sort of make a point about this woman who's fighting for freedom, which is very, very moving, actually. I found her final episode very moving indeed. And then we also have the character of Vahida, who is scarred. She's one of the daughters. She's a courtesan. She's fascinating because she has a teenage daughter called Shuma, who at one point steals her patron. And you realize just how savage and ruthless this game is. And then contrasted with these women who are more or less politically astute and in charge of what they're doing, we have the very naive, very romantic with a capital R daughter called Alamzeb, who is played by Charmin Sejal, who I didn't realize is actually Sanjay Leela Bhansali's niece and worked as assistant director on some of his films. So this is really her first major role. She's meant to be that naive young girl who is trying to resist Malika Jan urging her to have her initiation ceremony and to become a courtesan. She falls in love with Tajdar Baloch, who is the son of a Nawab, played by Tahir Shah. And this is the kind of the classic naive love story at the center of the series. It is a love story, but how is a courtesan's daughter going to marry the son of a Nawab and be accepted? The answer is not. But we do see, I think, rather a sweet story, but to me, not as interesting as the adults, so to say, because this is more of the kind of classic Indian syrupy stuff that we have. And finally, there are a couple of English characters. They're mostly, as one might expect, the sort of caricature evil bad guys. There's really no attempt to give them any shade of character. But, to be honest, this show is not about them at all. The show is about the women. It's about them ultimately having to get through their petty rivalries and, fight for independence. And it's about watching amazing, beautiful mujaras performed as written by Sanjay Leela Bhansali. I can't recommend the show enough. It's wonderful to see some of these older actresses coming back to the screen. Amazing to see Manisha Koirala in a starring role. Fantastically rendered and imagined characters. And I'm so excited to see that this is done well in international markets because this cannot have been cheap to film. It's sumptuous, it's lavish, and I really hope Netflix feel that it's done the numbers to warrant Bhansali getting follow-up shows. So with that, thank you very much for listening. If you've got a comment, please leave it at bina007.com or on the YouTube channel. Thank you for listening.